Hey everybody, this is Paul Culmsee from Seven Sigma Business Solutions in Western Australia. And what I'm going to do in this video is talk to you about powerful questions. Questions that enable you to have breakthrough in various conversations and in various circumstances. The background to how this came about is I'm a practitioner of a technique called dialogue mapping, which is a technique that's used in facilitated workshops very often, where you capture the rationale or the contribution made by participants as they work through a problem, and you put it onto a shared display using special computer software. And the idea behind this is that you're making the rationale of participants explicit, which always increases the chance of breakthrough, reduces the chance of misunderstandings, and actually, just on a practical sense, means people don't repeat themselves as much as they may otherwise do, because you've sort of captured it, acknowledged them, and you've put it up there on a shared display. Now, in doing this, and I've done this for a while, probably since about 2007, and I've been involved in many conversations in many different scenarios, ranging from strategic planning to requirements analysis to team development, and just about everything in between. And I've noticed that conversations follow a certain pattern, and groups can get themselves tied up really easily when they don't ask themselves the right question of each other. So what I'm going to do is actually give you some of the questions that I have found work really, really well in workshop scenarios. I'll do it using the dialogue mapping software, but it's important to note for this video that you could use these in any workshops, and you could use these in no matter which particular method or tools you like to facilitate with. So I'll do it using the dialogue mapping software, which will give you a bit of a sense of what I do, but let's go through and have a look at powerful questions. Alright, what you're looking at the moment is the dialogue mapping software that I use. So if I want you to imagine, the typical scenario here is that there will be a group of people sitting in a room facing a projector or a projected screen, and on the screen is what you're seeing in front of you. So this software, by the way, is called Compendium, and it's actually freeware, and if you Google Compendium you'll be able to download the latest version. Now, it's actually a visual tool that enables you to create conversation. So for example, if I put a question to, if you can see the little icon there, question, and I can say, why are we here? In a typical live workshop there might be various ideas or answers to that question. And of course in this instance the answer is to learn about powerful questions. And what you see there, if you look very closely, that's a little light bulb. That means it's an idea, and that one there is a question. So while it might look like a mind map from a superficial point of view, the fact that these icons are quite specific and it's very much driven by the icons is actually what makes it a little different. So the pro, so there's two other icons I tend to work with in dialogue mapping. One's called a pro. A pro supports an idea, so the pro here might be learning these questions allows you to have increased chance of breakthrough in complex issues. So that's a pro that supports this idea. And literally dialogue mapping is simply this. It is the visual mapping of questions, nothing more. And just so that you're aware, a con, which is the other icon, is a counter-argument. So I don't really have a counter-argument for this one, but how about this? Might get you trouble with your boss. And you might say, in what way? And I'll make the icons bigger for now. You may ask a question they do not wish to answer. So basically what you're looking at there, I guess, really is dialogue mapping. Dialogue mapping 101, this idea of question, idea, pro, con. Now, as I said, I've been doing this for about the last 5 years, and I use this technique by myself and with facilitators on all sorts of different projects and problems of varying levels of complexity. So let's now talk about the core purpose of why we're here, to learn about powerful questions. So coming up under that, we can say this: what are the powerful questions? Now at this point I'm going to revert these icons to a smaller size, which will allow us to have a little bit more screen real estate. So let's go through the first one. The first powerful question for me is the Platitude Buster question. Now let me explain about this. So here's the first one. So what is a platitude? Now if you don't know what a platitude is, it's basically, you've heard them, you're probably surrounded by them. Platitudes are descriptions of, or fancy words or fancy phrases that sound very impressive and sound very correct, but ultimately there's not a lot of substance behind it. So for example, an example of a platitude, so let's say here it's a trite or meaningless statement made to sound profound. What is an example of a platitude? Well, how about something like, we are here to deliver best practice systems to drive corporate excellence. Now, that's the sort of statement that probably isn't that out of place in many organizations in terms of what might be sitting up on the wall for a mission statement or a vision statement, or you might even hear your boss use grandiose statement like that ultimately don't really tell you a hell of a lot. So that's basically a platitude. Now platitudes, there are some subtle examples. So that's basically a fairly extreme example of a platitude, but how about some more subtle examples of platitudes? So I'll give you some. For example, here is where platitudes can get you into trouble. A word like quality. Now, why is this a platitude? You may not think it is. Well, I'll tell you basically the issue here. A lot of people, years ago I was at a job interview and I made the point that I believe most issues could be quantified in some way, and the interviewer said to me, well, how do you measure quality? And I didn't have an answer for him at the time, and I also did not get the job. But here's the thing, that question, how do you measure quality, makes no sense whatsoever, and here's why. You take this thing called quality, you're only doing it, you're only undertaking a quality initiative because you believe it's going to make a difference in some way. Otherwise, and it has to be a positive difference, because otherwise you wouldn't spend the money and the time and the effort and the resources to basically chase this thing called quality. And so when you think about it, it's almost like this, and I'll do a separate little diagram here. Here is our present state, and here is some future state. Now, quality, asking how you measure quality makes no sense, because it's the difference it makes that actually tells you whether it works. So remember, you only undertake this thing you call quality because you believe it's going to make a difference. So that means quality is the means by which you get to somewhere. You don't measure the means at all. You measure the difference between the means and the ends. So if quality is there to make a difference, you don't measure quality, you measure its difference. And so if you then change the frame of the question, it's like, well, what difference would quality make? Now, quality is not the only word that suffers from this problem. And you notice that things like, I'll give you some others. So words like governance, words like innovation, if I spell it correctly, words like sustainability. You put a bunch of sustainability experts into a room and you ask them to define sustainability, and you'll basically create an argument. But here's the thing, you don't actually have to define things too bad, because what you can say instead is, okay, well, if we had sustainability, if we had innovation, if we had governance, how would things be different? what is the future? So that's the issue. And in fact, here's the subtle thing. If you say, how do we measure sustainability, or how do we measure innovation? In fact, even if you say, how do you define these? The act of defining these actually subtly puts them up here as the future state. Because rather than ask what difference they're going to make, you're trying to come up with that difference by defining what these terms mean. And so it has this subtle effect that they become the future state. And that's when they become a platitude. They don't mean anything. You create arguments. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to delete this stuff and basically say, so what is the platitude buster question? And the question is this. You'd say something like this. So if you had an insert platitude here, how would things be different to now? So if we take our quality example, okay, so if you had quality, how would things be different to now? Another example, if you had improved collaboration, how would things be different to now? If you had best practice business analytics, how would things be different to now? And so what I found very useful with that question is I'm constantly surrounded by platitudes and people unconsciously use them, and they can easily conflate things to way bigger than they have to be. So when I'm given a platitude word, such as best practice, collaboration, innovative outcomes, single source of the truth, or better performance, I instantly flip the frame of the question and I say, okay, well, if you had that, how would things be different to now? And if you think about the answers, there's really one of two scenarios. Number one, people will say increased X, decreased Y. So let's actually get some more stuff. So benefits of asking this question, or the question in this way. And the answer is, answers tend to start with increased this or decreased that. And you know what's important about that? These answers are inherently measurable. Okay? Now, the one thing is, sometimes you will not get increase this or decrease that. Sometimes you will get another platitude. So the counter argument here is, so if I say, okay, so what does quality look like? And someone might say improved efficiency. So sometimes people will answer this question with another platitude. How can we mitigate this? How can we mitigate this this problem of basically someone giving you an equally grandiose but meaningless statement from the previous one? Well, you ask the question again. And you persistently ask that question again. And another variation on this question, maybe, would be something like, and what would this look like? What would improved quality look like? And so eventually you're able to unpack platitudes. And this is where this visual mapping of rationale, which you can see is sort of unfolded as I have discussed this. This is a good example of how you can start to unpack these things. But the main point is this: if you are served up a statement that you or you believe the people you are working with do not have a shared understanding on what that means, rather than ask the person or the group to define that term, ask them what difference it makes. By doing so, you take the focus away from an elaborate definition, which can turn into equally elaborate solutions. You actually put the focus back on the outcomes you are looking for. So that's my first powerful question. And so that's the platitude buster question. If you had insert platitude word or phrase here, how would things be different to now? So What I will do in the remainder of these video series is I'm going to go through some other powerful questions, but hopefully you found that useful. Please provide feedback in the comments of the YouTube comment system, or else ping me via Twitter or my blog. The blog is basically www.cleverworkarounds.com, and my Twitter is Paul Culmsee. So hopefully you enjoyed this. I will continue to build on this map, and we will use this, and by the time I'm done we will have quite a large map with a whole bunch of powerful questions. Thanks everyone. See you later.